Welcome to Lovecraft Country Bumpkin, y'all. We're your hosts, Tori,
Klara,
and LaTara.
We'll be here every week to chat about the show, its themes, its best moments, and anything else that gave us nightmares.
In this episode, Atticus sets out to find the missing pages of the Book of Adam before Christina can. This takes them to Boston, where they manage to recover the pages in an Indiana Jones-style adventure through the vault under Titus Braithwaite's museum. The episode ends with Montrose murdering Yahima, the indigenous person who Titus trapped in the vault after she refused to translate the Book of Names for him.
So, I don't know about y'all, but I personally felt that this episode got back on track. Last episode, we talked a little bit about how we were a little disappointed by some of the choices that were made, that we were like a little let down by the action. But this time, I really felt like it got back to the action-packed, funny, really tightly written show that we all know and love.
I would agree for sure. The suspense in this episode was
so good.
Perfect. Yeah.
Someone tell me why I'm more scared of that booby trap than I was of the basketball player with the baby head.
Word.
But I just think like the scene with the plank was just like incredible TV writing, right? Like it's just so you're on a tightrope essentially, and you got suspense at both ends, a swinging booby trap axe and a disappearing plank on the other side. And so like we have our characters, they're on the brink of like falling to their deaths, and we got all these things happening at the same time. We're like, oh my goodness, the episode's only half over. What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen now?
Yep. No, that was definitely one of like the best scenes. And I think for me, I kept waiting for them to sort of bring this. You know how suspense is, like they build it and then like you kind of like, but like I feel like it just after that scene it just kept like shooting back up.
It kept
like,
going.
I was like,
there's no break.
There's no break. I'm like, oh, I can chill. No, LaTara, you cannot chill. This is not the time to chill. It was really well done.
I feel that's what they did with like the first episode too, is that they had like really like going back to LaTara's like Tori's comment about being like really tightly written. Like the first episode is like constant suspense, building, like going back to our like car chase scene where you can't go above 25 miles an hour. Like it's like masterful like suspense writing, and it just keeps going till the end of the episode.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think like we like touched on a few things that I think made this for us a more successful, a more impactful episode than episode 3. And I know in our last like podcast, I was talking about how uncomfortable I was with the way that Emmett Till was referenced in the previous episode. And so I think I really actually which might be a little surprising to some of our listeners, but the way that they like sort of referenced him again, like very shortly in this episode, it actually helps me feel a little bit better about the way he was used in the previous episode. So previously I kind of felt like they used like the murder of like a child, as sort of like just for shock factor, because it was so quickly referenced in such a obviously contrived scene, right? Like that Emmett Till would be like using a Ouija board with a bunch of other Black kids on the north side before he like takes this trip. It's for me, it was, well, you guys know how I feel about that. But anyway, I actually like that they referenced him very briefly in this episode as well, just because it makes me think that maybe he wasn't being used just for a quick emotional shock factor. Perhaps they are building to something larger with the true story of his lynching. And so I'm interested to see what they do with that, like whether like Bobo is the character who I'm speaking about for our listeners who don't know. So like Bobo was a nickname that Emmett Till's mother used for him. So when talking about Bobo in the show, I'm thinking of Emmett Till, the real person, and then like, but also like the way that he is referenced in the show. So I'm interested in seeing what happens with Bobo, and if that's like a larger plot line that takes into account in like a more sensitive and nuanced way the very real tragedy of Emmett Till's lynching when he went down south. So
we were chatting earlier before we started recording about the the comfort of like, or maybe the, the support, the comfort of like having a more sustained reference to a historical figure that is Emmett Till. But we were also chatting a little bit about, what would it mean to fictionalize, a historical tragedy that was so, incredibly violent and so history making, and its repercussions for the civil rights movement afterwards. So I appreciate that LaTara feels a little bit better about the continuation of references towards Emmett Till. But we were also talking about what would it mean politically to have a fictionalized, or to use to use a fictionalized narrative of Emmett Till's life.
Yeah, I feel like it's a sort of thing where like we won't know how we really feel about it, because I think you bring up a great point, Klara, in terms of like our previous discussion, what it means to fictionalize a real person, particularly one that like hits so close to home for so many Black Americans, and I think like even not Black Americans. And so I think ultimately the way we feel about that will probably depend on what they actually do with us. You know what I'm saying? Like, because I could see this being amazing and moving and thought provoking, and I can also see it being awful. So I'm cool to be patient, I guess, and see what the show does with this before like deciding if I'm like iffy about it. I was really iffy last week, but now I'm willing to like be chill and kind of see what happens, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and get into our Bummy Awards. For our new listeners, the Bummy Awards are the recognitions that we give every week to the characters and the scenes and the show's aspects that stood out to us the most. So for this episode, the person who won the episode for me was Yahima. And just like a brief note, we would like to use the she pronoun for Yahima. We went back and forth on what kind of pronouns we should be using because this person is two-spirited. But we ended up settling on she because of that. That's what the show used. That's what Atticus used to refer to her. So we'll be using she, her pronouns, but we did kick around the idea of using they just because this person is two-spirited, and we want to represent her as best as we can, but ultimately we don't know what kind of pronouns she would have used. And really, I think that this ties back into the concept of two-spiritedness. I looked into it after watching the episode because I had not read a lot about it before. And I think it's important to note that two-spiritedness, it's a term that was created in order to replace a more racist and derogatory term that had existed previously, which carried connotations of like sexual exploitation and slavery. But it's also an imperfect term in itself because it is used as kind of a catch-all for people in Native American cultures or, indigenous cultures that don't conform to Western gender binaries. Which is such a vast category. You have your gay men, you have your lesbian women, you also have like transgender individuals, you have intersex individuals like a Yahima who are born with maybe like multiple genitalia like she has, or maybe they're born with like invisible conditions that affect their like sex expression. So ultimately, two-spirited really seems to be a bit of a lacking term because it has to ultimately call back to the Western notions of the divisive split between the two genders and just Western gender norms.
Yeah, and it's like acknowledging I think that you called it like an imperfect term is like kind of like really like really well encapsulates kind of like the linguistic gaps or the linguistic problems of trying to with language represent something that is different than what the language that we're using epistemologically kind of tends to lean towards. So like what we refer to as two-spiritedness and what we now refer to as like indigenous cultures, indigenous gender expressions, and how do we represent that, and what kind of like things fall through the gaps with our linguistic terms and our linguistic challenges.
Well, yeah, but all of that aside, like even before I had read about what two-spiritedness was and like had this complex discussion with my co-host here, like I was fascinated by Yahima, and I am utterly heartbroken that she's already gone. I thought there was so much potential in this character and so much not just of a chance for them to like get ahead, which, you know, is not inconsequential, but like she was so fascinating in her own right, and she deserved so much better than what she got from Titus Braithwaite and, you know, from her situation. For me, she really called to mind La Malinche, who is a figure in Mexican specifically, but like, you know, Latin American mythology. She is the person who helped Hernan Cortes and translated for him as he was traveling through Mexico towards Tenochtitlan, where he would ultimately overthrow the Aztec Empire. And she's seen as this sort of like traitor figure, the like, you know, but also in sympathetic lights in certain communities. She's related to monster mythology in Mexico because of her relation to La Llorona myth, but she's also viewed as a very like sensitive and like exploited character, arguably the first exploited like native individual from Mexico. So there's just like so much going on here because, you know, Yahima is Titus Braithwaite's translator. So there's obvious parallels between those two things and kind of brings her into connection with this very conflicted figure from mythology. I was fascinated by that.
Yeah, and I think when Atticus is like translating for the translator for Yahima, he mentions that she said that there was no way that she could have known. She had no reason to distrust the colonizer. She had no reason to distrust Titus. She had no reason to predict, you know, genocidal violence and profound historical violence that would ensue from his colonization either. It's a complicated figure. She's a complicated character, which is why it seems how to have kind of a short change that she only is on screen for 10-15 minutes. And what she represents is very complex in terms of like the ethnic and racial history of Latin America and the Caribbean, even extending into the North American continent. And it's a very layered and very complex history to be represented into one character who
and so quickly.
Yeah, and so quickly, who even has like, you know, in terms of like the questions of plot, figures very specifically in terms of plot development and kind of like the carrying on the overarching plot across the series.
But one of y'all said something about like how she had no reason to distrust Titus, and thinking about like what like different like ways of knowing tell you like what things are even possible, right? Like there are like entire possibilities of outcomes that like she would not have considered because it like exists in a whole other an entirely other epistemology that's completely separate from and other to her own. And that is evidently one where genocide and that sort of world changing, world ending cruelty is possible. And I know like we said we talk about like knowledge later on in the episode, but I just want to touch on like on that too. Like there's something about like even being able to envision different structures of the world. And how those different envisionings are also kind of being referenced and like layered here.
Yeah, this is why I love Yahima. There's so much. There's so much going on.
Yeah. I'm really glad she like won the episode for you, Tori.
Yeah, me too.
I'm devastated, honestly. Devastated.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What about you guys? Who won the episode for you?
So my episode winners, I have two. I only told y'all about one, but then I remembered the other one. So Ruby is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
She is bad AF. She's beautiful, like talented, like driven. I'm obsessed with her. I'm also obsessed. I'm also obsessed with that like pink rose gold like sequins. I was like,
unreal.
Yeah.
Is this a bustier? Is this a corset? I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That was magical. Okay, magical. She's incredible. So Ruby was one of my like episode winners, but also Hippolyta. Just the she has always known there was something wrong. She has always known someone was lying to her, someone was hiding something. All of a sudden, those like them three magically end up back in Chicago again. She's like, this is not right. And then she finds the map, and then her and Dee are like, I'm gonna go find out what happened to George. And I just loved the way that she was just like, this is happening. I need to know what happened to my husband. Like, I'm not gonna allow y'all to continue to lie to me and keep me in the dark. And so the two of them together, there's many things happening, both in like the complexity of their characters, of course, which we have talked about many times on this podcast. Having these like incredibly nuanced, complex Black characters has been a joy, obviously, to watch and to immerse myself in. But there's also quite a bit here. I'm thinking, particularly from a Black American context of colorism, which, like, of course, appears. And like cultures all around the world. But when I think particularly of Black American women, right there's a reason. I've been wondering what the show would do about this. That Letty is a lighter skinned Black woman with a looser hair texture, and the half sister of Ruby, who is darker skinned, and also Hippolyta, who is darker skinned. I am excited that we're getting to see more of these two darker skinned Black women characters, and Letty is not the only one who gets to have the spotlight. I'm because I love all three of them, but I was grateful for the opportunity to get to know Ruby and Hippolyta a little bit better in this episode, and I'm really interested to see what they might do with discussions of colorism going forward. And also, I have no idea what's happening with Ruby and like the department store and what's his face, William. Bro, that was a hot sex scene. I ain't even gonna hold you up. That was cute. You know, and then Hippolyta's like, I'm gonna go find what happened to my husband, and I'm like, yes, girl, you better. Like, I support this. So the two of them, like, I'm here all day for like cool Black women doing cool Black women things and like being lovely. And Ruby's beautiful. That's all I have.
But yeah, that sex scene between what's his face, William, and Ruby, I have weird feelings about it. I like don't know what to do. I'm like, I like, why William? Why Ruby? Why is this so hot? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to Ruby?
Yes, that caught my attention too, like because of the way that it was in the book. I want to point out that in the book, this was Caleb Braithwaite, who is Christina in the show.
Yeah.
So when I realized that they were making Caleb into a female, I was immediately thought about this scene, and I was like, oh, does this mean it's going to be like a lesbian relationship? Is it like going to get cut? I didn't anticipate the way that they were kind of like split the difference between Christina and William to create the Caleb character and like fill that space. So there is something coming up in the next episode regarding this. Like there will be shockwaves into the future from what happened tonight. So I'm really looking forward to what happens and just how that ends up playing out and how Christina gets drawn in. Because clearly William's a henchman here.
Yes. Yeah.
Not that this was probably a very difficult and terrible task for him, but
Bro,
he's obviously doing some bidding.
Yeah, that was. I was just so surprised. I was like, Girl, I ain't even mad at you. I just want to see what I definitely want to see what comes out of it. I'm really excited for like the next episode. Now that you said that, Tori, like there will be
little teaser.
Right. I'm like, oh, okay.
The person who won my episode, the person who won the episode, it's just the costumes. The costume design for this episode was incredible. It was impeccable. Like Christina's cute little like pant and like polo shirt outfit, beautiful. Ruby's rose gold sequin bustier split, dress split with the legs, beautiful.
Oh
the
God.
hat she wore in the department store and the way she had it tilted, beautiful. Letty's outfits in general are always fantastic, but I really loved her cute little like yellow jumpsuit with like the blue tennis shoes. Adorable.
Yeah.
So cute. I just think like in general, like the set design, costuming and set design are different things, but the set design in conjunction with the costuming for the show in general has been quite strong and quite impeccable. But I feel like they like I don't know, like I think the costume design and the outfits for this episode were just like really like they were all so cute and so good and so beautiful. They all looked so great.
I agree.
Me too. It's just visually stunning in addition to being a great show. So
yes, absolutely,
very much so.
All
Even like Montrose's cute little polos, I like them
all. No, the best Montrose outfit was when he was in his undies burning the bylaws to the sun.
No, that man made me so mad.
Yes, I actually, this relates to my standout scene, so I would like to go ahead and like draw that in. My standout scene for this episode was the final scene because you have the like one of the very few tender moments that we've seen between Atticus and his father, and probably the only time that we've ever seen him praise Atticus. And then immediately goes to him murdering this wonderful character that we're already mourned about a lot in this episode. But just like the switch from this like strangely tender moment to this like excruciating loss and this like brutality, it was very, very upsetting to me. So it's not a standout scene because I liked it, because honestly, I'm really mad at pretty much every decision Montrose made in this episode. Like burning the bylaws, I'm out. Murdering Yahima, like just the way he interacts with Tick almost every single time, like just
always.
So, but yes, we had talked about him. I don't know. He's just making so many choices on behalf of everyone that affect everyone, and making them on his own.
What does like the kind of like what does the turnaround between like tender father-son moment to killing Yahima, like how does that affect like Tori's, as far as you can predict right now, like your like rating or your interpretation of the characterization of Montrose?
I mean, I think that it is extremely like it is a direct like logical progression from him like having this loving moment with Atticus to killing Yahima, because he thinks that he's doing this to protect Atticus. Like he said, I had to burn the bylaws because you won't stop. Like I had to do this to keep you from like going too far and getting too deep. He's like destroying all their weaponry though, to keep them from fighting.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'm having a hard time understanding Montrose as a character, probably because we don't know everything that's going on in his head yet. Clearly, there's a lot of plot stuff that's going to happen probably in the next episode. I'm glad you said that, Tori. That's really interesting.
I don't condone it though. Like I'm still not happy about it, but I see what he's doing, and that almost makes it worse to me. That like he just keeps trying so hard to love Atticus, but he can't do it well.
Yeah. Because the thing is, like, in much what you said, Tori, I also appreciate the way that you tied those two moments together through an analysis of Montrose's motives, right, of like protection. Because in theory, Tick is going to do what Tick wants to do, right? Tick is a grown man.
Montrose does what Montrose wants to do.
Right. Like, so you is like, in my head, him like burning the book. If we go with like the interpretation that it's possible he also killed Yahima as a form of like protecting Tick from himself, it's like you're not really protecting him because he's still gonna fight. He's a soldier, right? He's a vet. Like, and at every point of this episode, when Tick had the option to fight or to not, he fought, and so he's gonna still do that. And so in my head, all you're doing is taking away tools that, like tools in the form of the book, and then like Yahima as like a potential partner, like new team member, and also, quite frankly, repository of knowledge that they just don't have. And we talked about like how knowledge is like a recurring theme in this story, that having knowledge is a form of power, and like knowledge in various forms. So, because I think I agree with you, Torre, in that like perhaps Montrose thinks he's like helping, but I'm like, you're just taking away right resources that could help ultimately. So yeah, I'm also quite angry with him.
And I think you're like, from your analysis too, like it results from a fundamental misreading of his son. Like he just does not understand his son, and he's trying to protect him on his terms, like on Montrose's terms, rather than on terms that Atticus wants or can accept. And I think he has that line where he compares their team to the USSR, right? Like they're outgunned, they're behind, they're short, but he's continually rendering them further behind and further like unable to access the knowledge they need.
Yep.
So there's not like a nice ending to this, I think, because we have not wrapped up
this plot line.
Yeah, we don't know what's up with Montrose. We don't know, like, I think we do know how badly Tick is going to react when he figures out this has happened. But I don't think his meddling has ended. So, what about you guys? What was your standout scene today?
Mine is 2 levels. So, on just straight up my experience as a viewer, the plank scene was nuts.
Plank.
I just the suspense, and like the relentless building of suspense, right? Because like I'm thinking it's bad enough with like this plank, this long drop, right? You have like the knots, and Montrose's completely contrived story about his enslaved ancestor, which I'm not even gonna play. That was amazing, because I definitely believed. I was like, "Oh, that's so touching." And then when it was revealed that it was a lie, he was like, "But they got her across that." I was like, "You right. You right. You did what you had to do." But anyways, that's an aside. But like, it's like the having to tie the knots to like hold on to each other, and then going across the plank, and then it's revealed that there's like the swinging blade, and then it's revealed that the plank is disappearing, and then it's revealed that at the end of the plank there is a locked door that they have to get through, and only get through when Montrose. Yes, and they can only get through it when Montrose. Oh, he made me so angry because he burnt the book with the words in it, and they only lived because he happened to like remember it. You know what I'm saying? So that scene, the way they just like continually built elements of suspense and risk, was masterfully done. It was beautifully done. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. But there were still moments of like laughter a little bit to help release that tension while it kept building. It was just so great.
This episode was very funny.
Yeah, this episode was quite funny. So from like a viewer, experience thing, the plank for me, hands down. From like a sort of like analysis of plot, I actually really enjoyed the reveal that the elevator in Letty's house leads to this tomb. Because I remember, I don't know if you remember that at the end of episode 3, like at the end of in our podcast last time, like remember, like we were like,
where did all these bodies come from?
Yeah, right. It's like the elevator went all the way down, and I'm like, what is this tunnel under their basement? You know what I'm saying? And then it's like, where did all these bodies come from? And so just having that question answered in this episode, I thought was really, really well done, and also completely expanded my understanding of like what sort of power, like they are working up against. Like this is like, because this is a temporal sort of transportation,
like spatial stitching, basically.
Boston, Chicago, 3 hours walking now.
It's like that's pretty, like that's crazy, right? That's pretty impressive. That's huge. And so I appreciated that just in terms of beginning to understand some of the intersecting plot lines that have been introduced,
or the world building that it does.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great word. I have it did a lot of world building that was extremely impressive to me, quite frankly.
And it like gives me faith too. Like they didn't drop that plot thread. So like the things that are confusing to me now I have like more faith. Like, oh, that meant something. They wouldn't have just stuck something weird in there, like for the shock value of like the tunnel of bodies, you know?
That's how I am with Emmett Till. I'm like, oh, maybe they're gonna do something.
Exactly.
I think for me, my standout scene was similarly for the same reason that LaTara expressed. The plank scene. I think it's just great TV writing. Like I said at the beginning of our episode, I think it's just really fun to watch. I love horror movies, and I like watching adventure movies for the same kind of sense of they're just fun, you know. This scene also made me think. I think one of the things that we were talking about when we were planning our podcast was kind of the way that the show is taking up questions of genre. And this scene, to me, explicitly was taking up, the kind of the adventure movie Indiana Jones, Journey to the Center of the Earth kind of genre of adventure, separately from that of our more narrowly defined horror genres. So it's just, and I think I think we felt very much Indiana Jones, or at least I did. And even when I think about Indiana Jones as a franchise, as a franchise that's invested in 30s Hollywood movies from the 30s. So it's so the Indiana Jones franchise is a franchise about genre itself. So I think just the episode is this particular scene with the plank scene was just fun to watch. Just also just really very smart, very creative, I think. So my standout scene is a tie between that and the scene that we're introduced to Yahima. Kind of the set of the ship, I think, was also really masterfully done in terms of set building and world building as well. And when Yahima comes back to life, I'm not quite sure how to describe what happened, but when she's no longer mummified,
desiccated,
and the kind of the protracted really cool special effects that they did to bring her back to her her full embodiedness, or to a more sense of live embodiedness was really cool to watch.
It was cool.
That was
and scary and creepy and kind of
yes.
It was especially because as just the motions of her body as it was being reconstituted, and it's I want to run, but I honestly can't tell if this is a risk. But also this is crazy, and I can't look away, and it's like I had so many conflicting impulses, and that I wanted to yell at them, why y'all watching her? Get back together, leave. Who cares? Just run, go away. And then I was well, maybe she's not a threat, LaTara. Maybe we should pause a little bit.
Give the monsters the benefit of the doubt.
Right, exactly. Give her a second. So I am glad they ultimately did not run, but I'm not even gonna lie. When that scene first happened, I was y'all are stupid. I would have peaced out immediately. Why are you still standing here watching this? But it was so horrific. Oh, this is why you can't look away.
Yes. Honestly, kept expecting Brendan Fraser to pop up in this episode. Yes. There were so many mummy vibes, and it was so Journey to the Center of the Earth. Where's Brendan?
What, Brendan Fraser to be in Lovecraft Country?
Yes, that would have been so great.
That would have been great, actually.
Yeah,
I haven't seen him in something in a while.
Yeah, and I want him to be good too,
Yeah.
Maybe something good.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the scene where we meet Yahima for the first time. I think is just really really cool world building, masterful use of special effects.
Yeah, very cool. Well, our last award is the Cross Country Award, which is where we highlight the theme that appears in Lovecraft Country, which is most relevant in our country. So I think for me, the issue of imperialism and neo-imperialism were so big this time because of the museum, where you saw all of these relics that Titus Braithwaite stole from their native countries and relocated to Boston. But also you hear Montrose accusing Tick of being a member of the imperialistic army, in reference to his service in Korea, which is an example of America not going to take over a country, like physically, like in literally, but ideologically imposing its beliefs on that country as well. So yeah, for me, there was just like a lot going on here about imperialism and thinking about like the broader world that America has also influenced. Hema is obviously a huge part of, but also like there were all these smaller references as well.
Do you see the like the quick references to like the USSR as well, feeding into this theme of imperialism?
I think so. It's like not as direct, but like the Cold War is obviously like an ideological conflict. And even though there was no like battles fought between America and the USSR, like, directly, but there were so many battles that they fought on other countries' turf. Which the Korean War is extremely emblematic because even today we still have North Korea and South Korea like demonstrating like the ideological impositions made on them by the USSR and the US at that time.
Or maybe even all like the small or like puppet countries that the USSR and like the United States were involved in during the Cold War, in which they had actual hot conflict. Especially like in Latin America, thinking of Chile and Pinochet, Cuba with the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, thinking about our buildup of nuclear weapons, way in which like Amero imperialism is happening at the same time, or at the same time that the Cold War is happening, or not at the same time as because of the Cold War. Like these two things are one and the same.
I think, Klara, your cross-country award was related to that as well, right?
Yeah, my cross-country award is ideas of colonialism, because I'm always thinking about colonialism, and kind of like the post-colonial or the decolonial conditions of life right now, globally, and in our local centers as well. This ties into Yahima, or Yahima ties into this, her figuration in the story. The fact that Titus Braithwaite, traveling all across the world, and the last place he went to was the Caribbean, which is, a very complex colonial site, in terms of kind of like the racializations that happen in the site of the Caribbean, and the way that those racializations kind of feed on one another. So in conjunction with my cross-country award of colonialism, America's own colonialism in the Cold War, or imperialism in the Cold War, but in conjunction with colonialism, the theory of the critical race theory of relational racializations, in which separate racializations are co-constitutive of each other, that like whiteness has often defined itself as against blackness, as against other racializations, but also that Asianness and blackness and indigeneity and whiteness, you cannot have one without all of them, and all these different racializations or racial definitions make up each other. So when we're thinking about Atticus's blackness and the ideas of hereditary race, and he is genealogically in line with the sons of Adam, and his blackness and how it relates to Yahima's indigeneity in the 1950s, or even at the moment of colonization or colonialism in her historical moment of the early 19th century. In 1810, I think, was the year that was cited, and all the different racial complexities in the Caribbean and Latin America, and then how this has repercussions globally well into the 20th century, into the 21st century.
I was just thinking, I feel a little bad because I feel like you all's cross country moments are like so much like broader and more complex than mine, because mine is still very much housed within like my own like background, lived experiences in terms of geographically. Sorry, that's what I'm trying to say. So my cross country is the reveal that that Chicago police chief was like not even a real member of the lodge, right? Because like I feel like Christina said something along the lines of like I missed your induction too, or something like that.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I don't even know. So he's like a wannabe lodge lodge member. I'm like, you're doing all this like evil, terrible stuff, and they don't even want you in their club, bro. Like that's embarrassing. But anyways, because I'm just listening to this and I'm like, I could see this happen. Like the Chicago Police Department will like have like some like secret brotherhood like underneath the surface, which I guess is really not so secret, right? Like the blue wall of violence is a real thing. But the reason it makes me really think about the Chicago Police Department today is a lot of people. I'm not quite sure if a lot of people like really like know about like history of police departments and whatnot. But the Chicago Police Department in particular has a very strong history in Irish communities, and so many many people who immigrated here from Ireland ended up settling in Chicago. A lot of those men ended up working as police officers because it was an undesirable job at the time, late 19th century. And as time went on, that power that was consolidated amongst Irish communities, which eventually became white communities. Thinking about like the American scale of racialization of white against black. So you have all these black people pouring in from the South, and suddenly these Irish police officers start looking a whole lot more white and a whole lot less, Irish. And it makes me think about it because that power is still quite consolidated. There are some entire whole families who are Irish and who are all police officers. Like I'm from the South Side originally, and I remember I once was at a restaurant and I saw this white kid. I looked like he was about a teenager, and he had on a T-shirt, and it had, I can't remember if it was CPD or Chicago Police Department, but some acknowledgement of Chicago Police, but under it was a 4-leaf clover.
Wow.
You could never have a black cop wear a CPD shirt where like the red, black, and green colors of like of Kwanzaa, and like a lot of black people will like use that to like a sort of a shorthand or like a broader reference to black ancestry and history in America. You like that would never happen. That would never happen. And there are black cops. There are Latinx cops. There are Asian cops. But this particular kid, who's clearly not a cop because he's a child, so I assume he comes from a family of cops, has an Irish Chicago Police T-shirt. I saw this probably 6 years ago when I was back home. So this is not something, right, that happened in like decades ago or whatever, right? Like I'm still young. This is recent, and it still very much exists. So for me, it was like this, like my immediate thought was, yeah, if any organization back home was going to have like this like sub level of like white men who consolidate power amongst themselves through like the murder and the the use of not just Black people, but anyone who is not of them. I could see the CPD having that, doing that, building that. That's not unrealistic to me. And so that was the moment, I think, where I kind of keyed in almost instinctively, thinking about obviously ongoing conversations around police brutality, and then in Chicago specifically, as well as other major cities. But since I'm a Chicagoan, it's like, I guess the one that I have lived through firsthand, and so I think that's kind of why that was my initial connection. But of course, it's a broader discussion amongst all of America.
I think your ability to focus on an actual detail of the show is really astounding, as opposed to my super capacious colonialism.
No.
And I also like want to say, like, it's like relational race theory isn't just like race's relationality is not just specific to the Caribbean, like, you know, even LaTara.
Right.
Yeah, very much like global. Or very much like, even you can see this in America, with like LaTara's story about the Irish and whiteness.
Yep. And of course, there's lots of resources. I think like probably one of the most famous books about that is How the Irish Became White. I can't remember the author's name. It's like on my shelf. I probably should go look. But like there's quite a bit written about, like, as you were saying, like, Klara, like the co-constitutiveness of racialization.
That's my favorite word.
Yep, it's a wonderfully complex word. But how white people became white, not white people, how Irish people became white.
Or how white people became white, you know?
Yeah, actually, no, you're right. Yes. In response to Blackness. And so like that, they had to exist in conflict with each other in order for each to gain their what's what I'm looking for? Where like you can read something where it makes sense in order for each of them to gain their legibility. Thank you.
Well, I think we're like coming close towards our time, but just to like synthesize a lot of the things that we've been talking about, I wanted to bring up another theme that I noticed, and that we can discuss, which is just the difficulty or like maybe even impossibility of like coalition building and solidarity among marginalized people in like white dominated spaces. And I think this came up a lot. We could obviously mention Yahima and like how Montrose killed her, when like you would think of them as like natural allies, right? You would think of them as people who should be on the same team, you know? It was shocking to me when he killed her, because I was like, can't you see that this is like your teammate? This like Titus also exploited her. Titus also like ruined her life. But like under these conditions, he thought like, this is the only choice for me. Like I have to kill her in order to disassociate my family, my people from like these terrible conditions being imposed on us by the sons of Adam.
I think like many things in this show, this is such. I agree, and I in terms of like the difficulty, perhaps maybe impossibility of coalition between different racial groups under white hegemony, and I feel like I probably will not do this justice, and I know we like have like a short amount of time, but like I'm thinking of like two things in regards to that. Thinking about both like Black and Indigenous relations, which is like a very complex, fraught history. One of the best books I've read about that was The Black Shoals by Tiffany King, most recently. And so what I loved about it was that she acknowledged without skating over the way in which both like African Americans and like various Indigenous Native American groups harmed one another. There's just no other way to put it. In an attempt to gain access to social and political power as it was being gatekept by whiteness. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why that last scene like hurt me so much, and I was so angry. Not just that Yahima was killed, but was killed by a black man, and who was doing so in an attempt. I don't know. I'm not even gonna make assumptions about what Montrose is attempting to do because I feel like they're gonna like tell us a lot more about it later. But I think like you made a great point, Klara, in that he apologized before he did it. So obviously he's trying to do something. He's like aiming to do something and feels that killing Yahima is the way to get to that thing, regardless of how he feels about her death. So he's willing to do something awful in order to bring about whatever it is that he's trying to do. And it was awful to watch. It's awful to think about. And then when trying to like bring it out to a broader discussion, it's a very difficult one, I think, to manage with nuance and care, but also without sort of like, I don't know, without glossing over important distinctions and acknowledgments. But it was hard.
Yeah, I think it's like, what do we mean by coalition? You know, what do we want out of coalition? Where does coalition come from? On what terms do we want coalition to be built upon? And then how do we, interpret the reasons for when coalition falls apart, or doesn't manifest itself in ways that we would like it to seem to be? And then the question becomes like, is coalition the lens through which we want to understand this? Are other terms better? Is solidarity better? How can we reframe our understandings of success? How can we reframe our understandings of safety? Either as that, one example is to decenter whiteness in such a way, or what does it mean? Like, how can we, what kinds of thinkings do we have to do? What kind of reframing do we have to do to make racial justice, or justice, racial justice, even justice more broadly, possible? And when we're thinking about, or like, for example, like when Ruby is talking about her fraught feelings about another Black woman being hired at the department store before she was able to re-interview, I think. She called it a rat race. Like, so I guess the question is like, how can we, like, what thinking do we have to do to make it so that we're not seeing it as a rat race anymore?
Yeah, I think like, to your point, one thing that you brought up was like the idea of decentering whiteness. And I definitely want to highlight that because I think it goes back to Torre's initial framing, which was, are these things possible in places like in white centered spaces, is what I think it was the phrase that you used, because I think that's the turn upon which I guess like I picture a lot of the tensions that are brought up in this show in regards to questions of coalition, whether or not we use coalition as the word, is that I think part of the dismantling of those limitations is the process of decentering whiteness. I think for me the question comes in, in this show in the 50s, and then also thinking about, because obviously the show wants us to constantly think about what's happening in the present day era as well.
In our moment.
Is decentering whiteness, as much as it's something that we would want to do, is it possible? Is it so ingrained in our society, like that whiteness is like that center, it's like that thing that people who are not white constantly seek greater proximity to, through a variety of choices. And this is something I've struggled with for a very long time. And I wonder, like, how much of this show is like asking us to consider whether or not like the decentering the whiteness is something that, if it's not possible, something that we are really capable of doing, given how ingrained it is at multiple levels. I'm not saying there's a yes or no answer to that. Like, I don't know. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know. But I think both of you brought it up. That same point showed up in something that both of you guys have said. And so if I take that a step further, I have to ask, right, is it possible? And if it is technically possible, do we have the strength or the knowledge or the vulnerability or the honesty or whatever is required to do that work across all of our racial groups?
Man, you know who don't? It's Montrose. I'm so mad.
Yeah.
I feel like they had this actual conversation where Letty was like, Atticus, this is not only happening to you. Stop acting like you're the center of the universe. And like, you know, it was said in anger, but at the same time, like the impulse behind it is to build a team, like to create a community that can face the threat of the Sons of Adam together. But then you have Montrose, who he is now like, we can't get rid of him. He is now irreplaceable because he's the only one who's read the bylaws. He's the one who could open that door. If they didn't have him, they would have died on that plank because he had read that book. He is now irreplaceable because he's the only one with this knowledge, but he's also the one running around behind the team's back, sabotaging things and going lone wolf. Yes. So Montrose clearly, he has an idea of what he's doing to keep people safe, but it's definitely not a coalition building effort.
I think also like there's like, because there's like multiple levels of like coalition. I'm just gonna go with that word until we think of a better word, because I think Clara's questions about
it's things that I've read. It's not just my like brain.
Like, no. But I like the questions. The problem is I don't have answers to any of them, which is why I'm just going to stick with coalition for now until we like can talk about this more in detail and figure out what's a better fit. But there's multiple levels of coalition. Like there's intraracial, right? Thinking about Ruby and the Black woman. There's interracial, right? Thinking about like Yahima and this team of like Black American characters. There's also though like the literal like what is the task that we're trying to get done that you are not helping us do, which is how I see like Montrose being like a foil to like this is our central task, and he's like, actually that's y'all task, my task is this, which is I think at the core that's what it is. Like he's not trying to do the same thing that Atticus and Letty are trying to do. He's just not. So he's going to keep doing stuff that throws them all off because, quite frankly, I don't think he's trying to have the same outcomes that they are.
I'm so upset. Last time we were talking about how excited we were to get a new sage, and now we have a new sage, and it's Montrose.
He's the most useless.
Like he's not going to be volunteering that information. He has all this knowledge, and he's going to bury it, as we've seen him bury it in the past, and continually burying it throughout this entire series. So. Our life is in Montrose's hands.
That's a terrible place for us to be. That's not ideal at all.
It's really not.
Maybe he knows something that we don't know.
I mean,
clearly he knows all the things we don't know, and then he still don't tell nobody. And then he goes off and kills people. You know, I am willing to be chill and see what Montrose does, but for right now, I agree with you, Tori. He gets on my nerves. I am mad at this man. I just no. Yeah. I'll be less mad at him when he reveals the millions of things he knows and he's not telling anyone else.
I agree. Well, I think that about wraps up our show for today. So if you enjoyed today's podcast, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave some comments for us. We'd love to hear about how you're enjoying the show. It really supports us and helps us grow our community.
Thanks, y'all. And remember, don't burn books containing crucial information while in creepy, crawly Lovecraft Country.